We just ask that any of you, any of the public that can help your neighbors, please do that. This is a difficult time for all of us.
A whole town was wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of 8 hours.
There is nothing left. All my neighbors except one are gone.
An eerie darkness has fallen over California, the worst wildfires the Golden State has ever seen. Thick, choking, black smoke over hundreds of thousands of acres, spreading in only hours. People stunned, tired, exhausted, fleeing the fires with little more than the clothes on their backs, driven from the safety of their home in a matter of hours. Here in Canada,
the tenants of 650 Parliament could definitely use a Superman, but we don't have a Superman in this situation, so we kind of have to bind together and help each other.
When fire forced 1,500 people from their Toronto apartments, few thought it would last for months. There's still no sign of when they will be able to return home. And in our nation's capital,
Everything started to shake and there's a weird sound, and that's when all the windows blew out on us.
And then glass was just shooting at us.
It's like a horror film.
some people still without homes after a series of twisters touched down. Today on Context, our neighbors in crisis. How can we help? I'm Lorna Duick.
I'm Sheldon Neal.
And I'm Molly Thomas.
And this is Context.
My mother and I have moved 4 times since the fire.
Displaced by an electrical fire that started in the basement of a Toronto high-rise. 3 months later, residents are still waiting to get back into their apartments.
And in Ottawa, 2 months after twisters tore through some neighborhoods of our nation's capital, many are still in need.
And to our neighbors in the West, it's been 2.5 years since the Fort Mac wildfires carved a path of destruction, and some residents still haven't returned home. We check in on recovery efforts.
And firefighters in California have battled more than 500 blazes in the past month. In just the past week, more than 225,000 acres is burned. That is bigger than the cities of Boston and Chicago combined. We check in with people on the ground.
Today's program is a reality check on neighbors in need. So first to California, at least 50 lives lost. More than 200 people missing in what officials are now calling the deadliest and most destructive wildfires in state history. Charred out vehicles, people driving through walls of fire, homes completely burnt to the ground. Northern and parts of Southern California right now, an inferno of flames. Here's where firefighters are focusing their attention. The largest blaze, what officials call the Camp Fire, is 125,000 acres. It's about 30% contained at this point. At one point, it was moving at 80 football fields a minute. Think about that. In the south, the Woolsey Fire is about 96,000 acres. It is affecting Los Angeles County. Only 35% of it is under control. Even large celebrity homes did not stand a chance. Let's go to Molly Thomas, who has a pastor from one of the worst hit areas, Paradise, California.
Thank you, Lorna. We have a pastor, Josh Gallagher, with us right now. He's part of a community that the Camp Fire destroyed. 200 people are still missing from that fire. Pastor, when did you know you had to get out of Paradise?
I just dropped my kids off at school, and when I came to the church office, there wasn't just smoke in the air. It felt like it was 7 o'clock at night, and it was during that time I called my wife and I said, I think we need to get out. I went and picked up my kids from school. We went back to our home, picked up as many things as we could, and then made our way back down the hill.
And what was that journey like? I mean, we're seeing the video and the photos. It's scary for us up here, up north.
Yeah, it was intense, to say the least, because the unique thing about Paradise is there's only really 3 ways in and 3 ways out, and everybody was trying to get out, which created a lot of gridlock for people getting down. So it was just a waiting game. You knew that the danger was coming. We weren't exactly sure how bad it was. We just knew that we had to get out. But then just having bumper-to-bumper traffic, slowly making your way down, not knowing where or if flames are going to show up. And as we were starting to leave, we saw a lot of fires start, and we saw some actual flames as we were going down the hill. And it was in that moment that we just started saying our silent prayers. We wanted to stay calm for our 3 kids that were in the vehicle with us. But it was during that point we knew that it was worse than we thought it was going to be. We thought it was just, hey, it's an evacuation. Let's be safe. Let's get out of here. But then when we saw the spot fires starting to show up everywhere, one right next to our house.
Pastor, how are you coping? Because I understand that you also lost your home.
Yes, we did. It's been an interesting dynamic because, yes, we did lose our home. Our family just moved into the community 3.5 months prior. So I'm processing this. Then I have my wife and my family and our 3 kids processing it. Then we also have a church community that we're processing this with, and then the community as a whole, because it's a very tight-knit community. So the community leaders are starting to come together and saying, okay, what's this going to look like as we move forward? So I'm having to switch different hats at different times throughout this whole process.
Josh, you spoke to a joint service in a neighboring community on Sunday. What was your message to people that have literally lost everything?
That was by far the hardest message that I ever had to prepare for. I wasn't even planning on giving it, but it was about Friday night, and the Lord impressed upon me that I was supposed to share that day. We looked actually at Psalms 88, and in that psalm, it's basically the psalmist starts off and he says, hey, God, you're good. But after that, everything that follows is just raw emotion of where this psalmist was at, what they were feeling, what they were thinking, at one point even blaming God for what had happened. And my message was that we serve a God who understands that we can still love him and be frustrated. We can still have faith with him and still have questions. We can cry and maybe have doubts, and at the exact same time still find hope in who he is. So that was the message that Sunday that I know I needed for myself, because I have questions. I have struggled absolutely through this process, but knowing that we serve a God that can walk through with our real emotions of what we're feeling was very powerful. To be able to convey that to our people, and even to myself, I needed to hear that probably more than anybody else.
Pastor, there's a recovery mode, and there's also funerals for people that lost their lives. How are you preparing for that?
One step at a time. Is how I'm preparing for that. Right now, I smile because you said recovery mode, because that's exactly what we're in right now. We're just trying to recover and get our basis for where we're even at. And as the death toll rises, that is a big thing that is in the back of my mind, knowing probably some of those people obviously are in our community and involved with our church, and coming alongside those families and those people as they grieve a much greater loss than even I have gone through. And in comparison to that, wanting to be there to serve those people, because those are going to be the ones that have been hit hardest most by this tragedy.
Pastor Josh Gallagher, we are praying for you from Canada, from Paradise Alliance Church. Thank you for taking time for us.
Thank you.
Here in Canada, a different story about the loss of a home, this time because of a fire that started in the electrical room of a downtown Toronto high-rise. When vulnerable people are hit by tragedy, we can see it all over the news headlines. But what happens after the cameras leave? 1,500 people now left without a home, and the city says its involvement in this incident is now concluded. So what happens to these displaced people in a city with a vacancy rate of less than 2%? Sheldon Neal now with a woman who is still waiting to get back into her home.
So take us back to that day where this all began, when you heard about the fire. Where were you? What went through your mind?
My partner and I were both at work, and I was actually on my way home from work when I get a phone call from him saying, someone at work told me there was a fire in our building, and I looked it up on the news, and that's what's happening. So I'm standing there with groceries that I picked up on the way home from work, like things are defrosting on me, walking up to the building, not really having any details at all, and seeing everyone out on the lawn and police tape going up and firefighters running around. I had no idea what was going on. So we got all our information from the news. And the building management was no help at all. They locked themselves in a room and didn't come out to talk to us.
Where did you call home from that day forward?
Well, even with grabbing what we can, it was get the cat and get out. That was about it. We had the few handfuls of clothing my partner could grab while I managed getting the animal out. We moved in with my partner's family for a few days. The Red Cross found us a hotel for 4 days at the end of August, and then we were out again. And then we were on our own. We had to stay with family. We had to find our own sublets. We've been paying for everything out of our own pockets and finding our own places to live.
What kind of support have you gotten from the Red Cross and even from the city of Toronto? What has that been looking like?
I'm honestly just angry at the city because they've been putting out these calls for donations and we haven't seen a cent from it. We haven't seen any of that money. We haven't seen any of that clothing. We haven't seen any of that food. I don't know what they're doing with it or where it's going, but it's certainly not coming to us. The Red Cross, they tried, but their mandate is only to cover things through the first 2 weeks after the disaster. And even then, they were struggling to because the housing crisis in the city is so bad that they were housing people at Regent's Park on cots.
When you went and you saw your apartment, what were things looking like?
Well, our apartment happens to be on the far side of the building from where the fire happened. So there was no fire damage at all. The only damage that has happened has been from their cleaning crews coming in and ransacking the place. They've tossed over our bedroom. They've clearly searched through our belongings. It's very violating. It's extremely upsetting.
What have you received in terms of when your move-in date is slated for?
The current date that we're working from is January 31st, but there's, again, no explanation of that, no reason to believe that it's not going to change on us again.
Right now, we're at the corner of Kingston and Main Street here in Toronto. This is where you now call home. How easy was it finding this place? How are the living conditions? How is it now?
Well, finding places to live became another full-time job for a little while. We found one place that was very temporary for the first month and a half, and then we had to move out of that place and find this place. We had to do it all ourselves. We had to find our own moving vans. We had to find our own accommodations. We had to answer Kijiji ads. I must have answered 100 Kijiji ads, and anyone who saw that we were only looking for short-term, nope, we can't take you.
Lastly, what I know you've probably gained relationship with the other tenants in your building. What is their responses like? Is there a sense of community, people trying to help each other get through this? What is that like, briefly?
I mean, the grassroots organization has been heartwarming in some ways. The fact that there were immediately Facebook and Twitter groups started up among the residents, the fact that people have been sharing tips about where there's been housing found, sharing information about donations that are coming in. But it's hard because a lot of the people in the building don't even speak English very well. There's a lot of new immigrants. There's a lot of young families who are East Indian and East Asian, and they're usually just terrified and looking for help on really basic things like, how do I write a letter? How do I read this information from the lawyers? How do I find somewhere to live when I don't know anyone in this city because I've just moved to Canada? And so we try really hard, and my partner and I especially, because we are some of the luckier ones who are Canadian and are white and do have our own money to do these things. We've been trying really hard to help each other, but it's so disheartening that the city doesn't take any responsibility and doesn't seem to care about us.
Well, to Ottawa now. Pastor Mike Hogaboom's church was damaged by the twisters. He joins us now to explain how his community is banding together still in the aftermath. Pastor, your church was damaged by the twister. Give us a picture of what happened.
Right. So maybe some of the listeners would know or not know, but the tornado came in on the Friday night. It whistled through here, within 30 seconds, 45 seconds, maybe a minute, came through our section, and there were 6 tornadoes actually that touched down in the Ottawa region, which was pretty remarkable in and of itself. It doesn't happen very often anywhere. Even for us to get a tornado is quite unlikely and unusual. But for us, the first part of our church is a fellowship hall. It was the old sanctuary that was turned into the fellowship hall when we built a larger space for our sanctuary. And the top 1/3 of the fellowship hall, the whole roof was lifted right off.
Wow.
One side and then 1/3 of the other side. So the whole peak of it was taken right off and just totally exposed. Some of the 2x4s and roof structure that was up there was thrown 200 yards past the church into our parking lot.
So, Pastor, let me quickly ask, and briefly, if you could let us know, what does recovery efforts look like for you on the ground?
Sure. So for us, I mean, first of all, I was just making sure that we were making sure that everything is safe, and then just making sure that we could begin to take a look at what needs to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
Needed to talk to a contractor. Needed to talk to our insurance. And fortunately, all those things were taken care of pretty quickly. And then from there, it was, what could we do for the community? It was kind of a natural instinct for us to shift from, making sure that everything is safe here to how is our neighborhood, which was totally devastated.
Pastor, my thoughts and prayers are with you. Myself, an Ottawa native, Ottawa Gatineau native as well. Thoughts and prayers with you at this time, Pastor, as you continue to build you and your congregation.
Thank you.
That was Pastor Mike Hogaboom. He joined us from Ottawa.
Thanks, Sheldon. Now let's get an update with a city councillor in Ottawa trying to help those impacted by the tornadoes.
Eli L. Shantiri is councillor for the West Carleton March Ward in Ottawa. His ward experienced extensive damage on the wake of the tornadoes, Dunrobin in particular. He joins me now from Ottawa. Councillor, what is recovery looking like now on the ground in your area?
Very slow, but we're doing our best, and the community is recovering very well. But as you know, it's a long process. It's not going to be over within 6 months or even a year, and maybe longer. So far, we had about 26 homes been demolished and ready for rebuild, but there's other still questionable by the insurance if should be demolished.
Wow, and reports suggest, as part of that recovery, reports suggest a backlog in reconstruction efforts in the city, things like required approvals for reconstruction, disputes between claimants and insurance companies. Also, I'm hearing people struggling to find contractors for reconstructive projects themselves. What are you seeing?
You're right, there's a limited contractor in our area, and as you know, it's not just West Carleton Marsh got hit, it's other area, part of the city. A lot of folks lost part of their roof or some damage from the trees. So it's quite a bit of damage, and it's quite a bit of demand on the trade people to be available. As far as the process going, we try very hard to work with all our support agency to make sure things move quickly, whether building permit or demolition permits or shutting off the gas or shutting off the hydro. So we're trying to expedite as much as we can and trying to make sure we help the community, because sometimes they don't even know which way to turn.
In what ways have you seen residents in your ward? You talked about how the community has been coming together. In what ways have residents in your ward been joining forces after such crisis?
Well, the community did come together, and we're still working together. We still have volunteers to help us. So the community effort is still there. We're trying to help the people with the removal of some of the large trees. As you know, they're not covered by insurance or any other. So the community coming out and helping these people with the removal of their trees. But the biggest concern I have is about 56 families are displaced at this time, and we need to help them out as much as we can to get them back to their own home.
Thank you so much, Councillor, for your time. I know you have a busy day ahead. Councillor Eli L. Shantiri, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
That was Councillor Eli L. Shantiri, Councillor of the West Carleton March Ward. He joined me from Ottawa.
When you go through a tragedy like that, your emotions is all mixed up. But you can see the good thing within the terrifying moment, because we saw in the evening was a lovely evening, and we all came out, and all the neighbors, we came together, and they realized that this is what is important in life,
I have worked all my life to create the kind of home that is a refuge, a place where you put your heart and soul into creating an environment that's just conducive for the kind of life you want to live with your family.
What our neighbors need the most when they are displaced from their homes. And still ahead, how one church is taking on the tough questions as people in Fort McMurray rebuild their lives after the wildfires destroyed everything.
Well, it's not just major disasters that leave our neighbors displaced. Marilyn Monk lost her home to fire. Lorna sat down with her to talk about the challenges she faced after losing her home. Take a look.
I guess the initial challenge is really just shelter, food, where am I going to stay, where will I live, and and how will I arrange this? So you end up having to move on several occasions. You move short term, I moved short term to a condo in my daughter's condo building. Then you move to a hotel, and then you move to a rental property, a fully furnished rental property, which all my neighbors had to do.
What did it feel like to not be home amid all that transition?
The first thought was, oh my gosh, I have worked all my life to create the kind of home that is a refuge, a place where you put your heart and soul into creating an environment that's just conducive for the kind of life you want to live with your family. And all of a sudden that's gone. From one day to the next, you've left that to this unknown.
We're looking at this city of Toronto because of the massive dislocation of 1,000 families, and it's been so quiet. Do you think we're running short on neighborliness? I'm very fortunate. I have resources and I have family in Toronto. It's unfathomable to me how people cope when they have so little resources and so few people to turn to. If there are folks who want to help out with helping your neighbor understand an insurance policy, helping your neighbor understand what their legal rights are, help your neighbor if they need emotional support, even just by phone has been shown to be effective in helping people deal with the stress of having something so fundamental as your shelter taken away from you. What can you tell us about resilience through trauma caused by the loss of a home or a natural disaster?
People need to know that it will take time. It will take time to sort things through practically, and it'll take time to sort things through emotionally.
No matter the natural disaster, being forced to leave one's home is a traumatizing experience. Some residents are still reeling from depression and anxiety from the Fort McMurray fires. That was more than 2 years ago. Dr. Candice Monson is an expert on PTSD, and she is from Ryerson University and joins us to talk about it. Doctor, what happens to the human psyche when someone loses their home?
So it is one of the most difficult things for people to lose their homes, and also to just watch the aftermath of these natural disasters. And of course, for people who might not have a lot of social support and logistical support afterward, it can be particularly traumatizing.
Doctor, I think about just the grieving process. I know there's items and memories that are lost in blazes. I mean, is there a healthy way to grieve those things as well?
Well, I think one of the most important things to know about grief is actually trying to avoid the loss and the grief and the sadness that goes along with any loss can actually complicate or prolong the grief. So we would actually recommend trying to make space for that sadness and that loss now, so that you're not sort of paying the price in the years to come over not feeling what is a very natural reaction to having that kind of loss. So I would say allowing yourself to have a very natural reaction, and that people around those who have had these losses to actually support them feeling those natural feelings that go along with it.
Doctor, what does that support look like? Because I think we all want to be good neighbors here.
Mm-hmm. So I think one thing it means is just really listening. The power of listening to other people is probably the most important thing we do, is just tuning in our everyday crazy lives to actually listen to people and listen to their pain. I think all of us can want to shy away from that or move away from that. So I think that's a key ingredient, is you don't have to say the right thing. Is just to be there with them. And obviously if someone is having a particularly strong reaction or difficult reaction, or one that's, lasting longer than expected or is complicating their functioning, then trying to be supportive of them seeking help and trying to destigmatize what it means to ask for professional help.
I think that power of presence is very important. Dr. Candice Monson from Ryerson University in Toronto, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Coming up, one pastor who was on the front lines of fighting the Fort McMurray wildfires. He tells us about his experience and how it made his faith even stronger.
What's the point? Like, why am I part of this department? What can I bring to this community? What is my purpose? After talking with God a lot through the fire and realizing that He is all-powerful, He is there to love you, He is there to protect you.
Well, it's been 2.5 years since the Fort McMurray wildfire, and some people are still living in temporary housing, renting small condos while they wait for their homes to be rebuilt. As fire tore through Fort Mac, Lucas Welsh was on the front lines, trying to save as many homes and buildings as possible. He is now a pastor and joins me by Skype. Lucas, help us understand the trauma of what people are going through as they live through the kind of scope of fire that Fort Mac had, what we now see in California.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we have learned is that there are the obvious problems that are going to arise after kind of catastrophes like this, the loss of property, the loss of home. Some of the things that you don't anticipate is the emotional and spiritual toll it can also take on people.
Your own spiritual recovery was not one you were willing to paper over. How did being on the front lines of wildfire affect your faith?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know at the time I was a part-time pastor, full-time firefighter, and that first day rolling into the city in our truck and seeing that the flames had gone past the forest and were actually inside the city was an incredibly daunting situation for us to be in. It got dark for a lot of us that were left in Fort McMurray. It was depressing. It was demoralizing to see the loss, to be separated from our families, knowing that they were going through trauma themselves. And it got really difficult.
Okay, no pressure, Pastor, but we do hope that there will be spiritual strength that outshines the horror of that kind of loss. Did it happen? Is there hope for what we're seeing of the spiritual needs that are going to be coming out of California?
Absolutely. There's so much hope. And one of the things that happens in these situations is people look for hope. People look for the light at the end of the tunnel. They feel the tragedy and they're looking for an answer. And one of the things that we can do as the church is we know that answer. We know that hope. And we could do what has maybe been done in the past and give pithy sayings that kind of gloss over the pain, saying things like everything happens for a reason, or when God closes a door, He opens a window. I don't think those things will help.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me, Pastor.
Awesome.
My mother used to say a long time ago, whenever there would be any really catastrophe, she would say, always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers, because if you look for the helpers, you'll know that there's hope.
The late, great Mr. Rogers there, who taught a generation of children to love their neighbor. A clip from that new documentary on the pop culture icon, always asking the perennial question, won't you be my neighbor? Well, we use the stories out of California to remind you that we are in a crisis of neighborliness. We still have 1,500 Canadians in Toronto waiting to be resettled in their homes after a fire. We have people in Ottawa waiting to be resettled in their homes after tornadoes. And California's fires were a reminder to us today that we need to continue the work of encouraging each other to be good neighbors. So here's the agencies you heard featured today. Here's agencies that are still currently on the ground in all three areas. And do our part and encourage someone. Get to know someone in crisis and be that neighbor. Be the helper. For all of us at Context, thank you for watching. Lots more on our website.